Welcome to Whistle Test. Tonight on Whistle Test we've got Rex Higgins, Steve Flea, the Wretched Admiral Sphincter, Grunties, Hot Nadgers.
Well, hello, welcome to the video. Let's go back to the world of 1970s pub rock. We all know the big names, even though big names wasn't really a thing in pub rock, like Brinsley Schwarz and Dr Feelgood and I suppose Dux Deluxe. But there were lots more bands that slipped under the radar, that should have been big, could have been big, and yet weren't. I was around at that time. I went to loads of gigs. I also put on quite a few myself. The 80s was more my pub rock era, but in the 70s I dabbled at the John Bull Chiswick and the Cock in Fulham and the Green Man at Stratford, places like that. I went to loads of venues at the time. The Kensington, the Nashville Rooms, Hope and Anchor, you get the idea. And I'm going to share with you what I found and what I saw.
Wait for it!
And first up is Meal Ticket. Back in late 1974, when Bees Make Honey broke up, Willie Finlayson and Rod Demick joined a band. Well, they helped form a band that became known as Meal Ticket, with a guy called Rick Jones, who was better known for being on children's TV, Play School, and he sang songs and things.
And while you're searching, I'll sing a song.
Right.
Say, can you find...
He was Canadian and he had a he had a feel for country rock, and that's really what Meal Ticket were. They were described as the British Eagles. Even though they probably didn't want to play the pubs, they were one of the stalwarts of the pub rock game. I saw them several times. I think I saw them at the Nashville for sure. I saw them at the Kensington, and I think I saw them at the Windsor Castle in the Harrow Road. My personal thing is, Rick wrote most of the songs, Rick Jones wrote most of the songs, and I got the idea they weren't written from personal experience. They were like describing things like, you know, there was one, The Man from Mexico, which I don't think he'd experienced the things that he sang in that song, but it was a good song, and it's still on one of my playlists to this day. And of course, when the punk thing took off, Meal Ticket were in totally the wrong place, and it just faded away. And next up is Clancy. Now, you won't find much about Clancy online. They were a collective, really. There was a guy from Northern Ireland called Ernie Graham, who was the creative force of Clancy. There were lots of good people in the band, don't get me wrong. But Ernie Graham had been in this band, Heir Apparent. Not a lot of people know this, but they only did one album, Heir Apparent, and that was actually produced by Jimi Hendrix, and he played on it. Colin Bass joined from the Foundation, so there was like a funky element to it, and it was a multicultural band, and they did some fantastic music. I really enjoyed Clancy. As I say, they never really broke through. Nobody knows why. I don't know. Was it the name? Was it they were just wrong for the time? I don't know. But when punk came, they'd already gone. And who's next then? Well, number 3 is the Tyla Gang.
Meet in Italia, styrofoam. She got a styrofoam ceiling, styrofoam floor.
And of course, Sean Tyler is best known for being, like, I suppose, the lead man, the front man of the band Dux Deluxe. And the Tyla Gang was his move when Dux Deluxe broke up. It was him presenting his music. The Tyla Gang never really found their feet, I don't think. And there were signs, because later on, I think 1992, when Sean Tyler was playing at Dingwall's in a band called The Force with Deke Leonard from Man, in the middle of this set, whispered in Deke's ear that he couldn't go on. And from that moment, he was off the stage for 25 years with stage fright. Looking back on some of the videos of those times of the Tyla Gang, there are moments when Sean looks very, perhaps I'm making this up, but I think there were times when Sean looks very uneasy. And when I saw them, he was either moving around a lot and really getting into it and enjoying it, or he, I don't know, he didn't move a lot. I don't know. This is obviously in retrospect, because at the time you don't notice, you go to so many gigs. The Tyla Gang was one of those bands that everybody thought they ought to see, because Dux Deluxe, as I mentioned at the start, they were one of the stalwarts of the pub rock system in the early 1970s, but they never really did as much as people like Brinsley Schwarz and Dr Feelgood. If there was, I don't know, I always thought if there was another, drop of something in the mix, they'd be fantastic and they'd be unbeatable. Well, the Tyla Gang, it was different to Dux Deluxe. It was a move, because Dux Deluxe was more of a band. This was Sean Tyler's own project. As I say, they had various lineups. They had people from Help Yourself and Man came and went. It was, I don't know, it was never really set in stone, the Tyla Gang. And that's maybe why they sort of disappeared. They didn't really break up, they more evaporated, is my recollection. And who's next then? Well, the next one is Joanne Kelly. Joanne Kelly's been called Britain's answer to Memphis, Minnie and Betty Smith, and she had a fantastic voice. Her brother, younger brother, Dave Kelly, well, he's now famous for being in the blues band with Paul Jones. Well, Dave Kelly, when they were teenagers, taught Joanne 4 chords, I think it was, on the guitar. She practiced and became quite good. And they formed a band together, which had various members of Fleetwood Mac, who at the time were becoming quite big. So it was an occasional band. The band was called Tramp. They put out 2 albums, one in 1969 and one in 1974. Never really did much. They were one of the mainstays of the southwest London scene, because Dave always lived in Wimbledon and he brought in Streatham, and Joanne, I think, the same, because she was better known as being a solo artist, and she was in great demand. She did sessions as a backing singer and as a vocalist, and apparently I think it was Canned Heat and Johnny Winter both wanted her to go and live permanently in the States and join their bands, but she refused because she wanted to stay here. She basically played the folk clubs, she played the pubs. I remember her particularly at the Half Moon Putney and the Troubadour. She would have a guitarist, normally her on guitar, and then someone else as the guitarist. I particularly remember a guy called Pete Emery. Sometimes it was Dave, sometimes, but I remember Pete. And she was a very special, it was one of those things that you sort of went to, and every time you heard her voice, you were amazed.
Hey, Black Papa, what's in my with you? In Sassafras, don't care what you do.
She was had a very clear, very soul-filled voice. And well, unfortunately, she started getting headaches and developed a brain tumour, and they operated, but it wasn't successful. And she died at a very young age, I think 46. So poor old Joe, that was Joanne Kelly, R.I.P. And who's next then? Well, the next one is Johnny G, a man who's very much still alive.
It's a rocket top breakdown, it's a sign of express. It's the Chattanooga choo-choo that I love best. Country line specially from New Orleans runs over the mountains by rivers and streams.
Living in Bath, I think, or Bath, take your pick, down in south-west England. And he does gigs on a Sunday at a pub called The Bell, I think it is, in Bath, which is one of the iconic Bath venues. I encountered Johnny G. His real name's John Gottin. He's from Anglo-Indian stock. So I think his mother was Indian and was born and brought up in West London. So a lot of his songs were about that dichotomy of I found them very amazing. The first time I ever saw him was at the John Bull Chiswick. We were both very young. He, at the time, did a one-man band, literally like just the Bennett used to do, where he had a bass drum, and he would have pedals, and he'd have a hi-hat and a guitar and a harmonica around his neck. And it was just mind-blowing. I mean, I really was knocked out by it. Later on, he had various bands. He played with John B. Spencer quite a lot, and he had his own band. And I remember Martin Chambers, who went off to play with Pill. A very young Martin Chambers. He was about 18, I think, when I saw him with Johnny G. And it was great. And then when I was at the Cock in Fulham, he was our regular Tuesday night act. And he was very popular, and he signed to Beggars Banquet Records, and they just had a hit with Tubeway Army, Gary Newman, and so they had a few pounds to spend and a bit of clout. I think Malcolm saw them at the Cock and signed him up, and because I know that when he was signed and they put the things out, they put out singles and all sorts of things, they spent a lot of money doing videos, and they filmed them, well, one of them at the Cock, and I was in it, but actually cut out at the last minute, of course, story of my life. And he was destined to stardom, but there is this thing that, I don't know, this may be totally unfair. I've never spoken to John about this, but there was a general feeling at the time, because he was supposed to go to America. He had this tour lined up in America. It was going to be huge. He had TV spots lined up. He was getting his suitcase out of the loft or something and fell off and broke his leg and couldn't go. And that was that. And there was the feeling around that he maybe sabotaged himself because he couldn't take the prospect of the fame. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But he was a very talented artist. He did another album, at least one, possibly two after that. And I am still a fan of his now. And I haven't been to I'll let into a little secret. Shall I? I'll let into a little secret. But before I do, can I just say, if you're not already subscribed, you know what I'm going to say now. Like this video if you like it. Share it with your friends and comment, let me know what you think. But a little secret for you, which not a lot of people know. I think I've told two people this, that since my last show at the Margate Whitney Gardens, which is Margate Rhythm and Rock, which was 5 years ago, I've been to only 2 gigs. Because I don't know, I think I've been to all the gigs I want to go to. I was speaking to somebody about this yesterday in a very nice tea rooms in Ramsgate, and we were talking about this, and I don't know, is it because I'm all gigged out? Or maybe I want to keep my memories of live shows. Maybe I'm just a bit old for going out and doing stuff like that. I still go out, because obviously being a local councillor, you've got to go out all the time. I've just been out today with a councillor surgery. So it can't be that. So it must be, I don't know, whatever it is. Anyway, let's get on with the music, Harry. That's Johnny G, still going to this day, and very good it is. Check him out, especially if you're in the Bath area. And the next one is Carol Grimes.
Can you do it, can you do it, can you do it to me one time?
Carol Grimes started off as a singer busking in the street in the West End of London. And I first came across her. Carol Grimes was a big icon of the 1960s alternative movement in Ladbroke Grove. I think she lived there at the time, in the Grove, as they called it, and she used to go to the Mangrove Cafe, which was a centre of black radicalism and black culture at the time. It was all very exciting stuff, let me tell you, and she was an integral part of all that scene. And there's a guy called Steve Miller, not that one, who was also, he was a mentor of hers and things. Steve went off to do jazz, and Carol did jazz, and she had loads of bands, and she was signed to the Stigwood organisation at one stage, and they managed her, and she had loads of things. But Carol has always been her own person, and she never was one I noticed to follow, well, basically to do what people wanted her to do. One of the first bands that she became known for was a band called Delivery. Then there was Uncle Dog. Then there was the London, well, not then, but I'm not saying these are in order, but there was the London Boogie Band. There was a band called Eyes Wide Open, I think they were called. And that was when she started to become more jazzy. She always did things in jazz venues, like at the Vortex and with jazz bands. But the band that played on the pub circuit was generally doing R&B, blues covers, the country, the general thing that people liked at the time. So like, I don't know, the nearest I can think of that what Carol Grimes that I saw back then sounded like was probably Janis Joplin with Big Brother and the Holding Company. It was that kind of thing. It was that bluesy, folky to a certain extent, but bluesy, jazz in there at the background, but not at the fore. But as she got on, it became more and more jazzy. Carol's still going now. I think she lives not so far away from me. I live in Ramsgate. I think she lives in Birchington-on-Sea. Don't quote me on that. Might be wrong. She had an accident a while ago. She broke her back and stuff. And all these things. She's now I say quite old. I'm quite old. I'm 71. She's older than me. I think she's in her 80s, maybe just at the start of the 80s. But she's still going strong with a fantastic voice. And I, again, suggest you check her out. And who's the last one then? Well, the last one is the first band that ever played for me, actually. Because back in 1972, have I told you the story about how I became social secretary at my college? Because the people I was staying with were older students than me, long story how I got there, but they had a drunken bet, that they could get an unknown student, first term student, that was me, elected as social secretary. And the guy who was the social secretary, I think he'd been there for 2 or 3 years, who was very established, he'd even formed a company and stuff, and they used to do stuff at various other places. But a lot of people didn't like that because that was considered to be a bit commercial, actually. His name was Steve, I can't remember his surname, but I got the job. And the first band I booked was actually the Third Ear Band. Reading Rolling Stone knew they'd just done the music for Roman Polanski's film of Macbeth, and that hadn't been released here. And I knew when it was released, they'd be quite prominent. So I booked them very cheaply. I don't know why they were so cheap. And I put them on, and they actually rammed the place when people couldn't get in and things like that. But the first band I actually booked that played first of all was Fusion Orchestra. Have I even mentioned their name yet? See, I go rambling off, don't I? You got to stop me if I go rambling off. But anyway, the Fusion Orchestra were the first one I ever met. There was a woman called Jill Saywood who was the lead singer, and to be perfectly honest with you, a lot of people thought they were a cheaper version of Curved Air, which they sounded, there was a bit of a Venn crossover, but I don't think they were. They had some great songs, and they were a very reliable band on the college circuit and on the pub rock circuit. And I wouldn't say they were my favourite band ever. This is, but don't forget, it's in 1972 when I booked them. That they formed, I think, in 1970. Jill Saywood joined them in 1971. That's when the real Fusion Orchestra. And I remember they played a lot at the Greyhound in Fulham. I think I went to see them there, or the Marquee, because they also played the Marquee. And they were a very competent, very good band. And again, it's just one of those things. If they just had that extra song and got played on the radio, they could have been huge. I mean, it's like, go back to Carol Grimes. Carol Grimes, a lot of people thought could have been Elkie Brooks. But the difference between Carol Grimes and Elkie Brooks is, the fact is, if the manager said, we should do this song next, Elkie Brooks would do that song, would record that song. But I got the impression that Carol Grimes possibly wouldn't. She'd want to do that song. So maybe that's what it is. Perhaps I'm just slandering all these people. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, back then there were so many bands that were really good in the 1970s. And I'm going to do a video on the 1980s because when I was doing this, I thought of a lot of bands I could have mentioned if I was talking about the 1980s. So I'll see you then. And in the meantime, you might want to watch this one next. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.